childhood friend and ultimate rival. A charismatic, hyper-ambitious man who believes speed and shortcuts trump ethics. Aisha Khan, Xavier's younger sister, a gifted digital artist suffering from a progressive neurological illness that requires an impossibly expensive surgery. Murad Ali, an aging, legendary real estate tycoon and philanthropist known for testing the character of those he employs. Zainab Khan, Xavier's widowed mother, whose prayers and quiet dignity serve as the family's spiritual anchor. The wind that swept through the high, jagged cliffs of the northern valley of Dareen carried the scent of wet pine and distant rain. For Xavier Khan, it also carried the scent of hard work. Standing on the edge of a precipice that overlooked a sprawling, undeveloped valley, the 24-year-old surveyor adjusted the lenses of his total station engineering equipment. His fingers were numb from the biting mountain cold, but his hand remained rock steady. He logged the coordinates manually into his notebook, his handwriting precise, geometric, and flawless. To Xavier, numbers did not lie. Land did not lie. And most importantly, time did not lie. You're still staring at the dirt, Xavier. A sharp, mocking voice broke the silence of the mountain air. Xavier didn't need to look up to know who it was. Cameron Malik stepped out of a sleek, expensive SUV parked illegally on the unpaved mountain track. Clad in a tailored Italian wool coat, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, Cameron looked like a man who had conquered the world, while Xavier, in his rugged, dirt-stained denim jacket and heavy work boots, looked like a man still trying to dig himself out of it. I'm verifying the soil density and structural fault lines for the proposed highway bypass, Xavier replied calmly, keeping his eye glued to the surveyor's scope. The eastern ridge has a high concentration of shale. If we don't adjust the foundation depth, the entire structure could compromise under heavy monsoon rains 5 years from now. Cameron laughed, a loud, echoing sound that bounced off the canyon walls. 5 years, Xavier, my brother, who cares about 5 years from now? The provincial government contract is being awarded next month. The judges don't look at shale density, they look at beautiful 3D renderings and low initial cost projections. While you've been sitting here for 3 weeks collecting dirt samples, I've already secured the signatures of 3 major ministry officials. Xavier finally stood up straight, wiping the sweat and dust from his forehead. His eyes were calm, lacking any trace of envy. A house built on sand might look beautiful for a day, Cameron. But it will bury its occupants when the storm hits. I prefer to build on rock. No matter how long it takes to chisel. Keep chiseling then, Cameron said, patting Xavier's shoulder with patronizing affection. But remember, the world belongs to the fast, not the patient. Saber is a beautiful word for poets, Xavier. In the real market, it's just another word for being left behind. With a roar of his engine, Cameron drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Xavier watched the dust settle slowly back onto the earth. He didn't feel anger, he felt a deep, profound sense of focus. He turned back to his equipment and continued his work, millimeter by millimeter. Later that evening, Xavier returned to his modest family home down in the valley town. The house was small, smelling of cardamom tea and old books, but it was filled with warmth. However, beneath the warmth lay a heavy, suffocating shadow. In the small living room, his 19-year-old sister, Aisha, sat propped up against a mountain of pillows. Her lap held a digital tablet, her trembling fingers trying desperately to guide a stylus across the screen. Once a prodigy whose digital landscapes won national awards, her hands were now betrayed by her own body. A progressive neurological condition was slowly cutting off the signals from her brain to her limbs. Xavier, she smiled, though the left side of her face drooped slightly with fatigue. Look at this, I'm trying to paint the sunset we saw last week. But the colors keep bleeding where I don't want them to. Xavier walked over, knelt beside her couch, and gently took her trembling hand in his. He guided her fingers, stabilizing the stylus, helping her draw a perfectly straight line of golden light across the digital canvas. The sunset doesn't mind if the colors bleed a little, Aisha, Xavier said softly, his voice dropping to a soothing hum. Nature takes its time to paint the sky. We have to be patient with the art, and with ourselves. From the kitchen doorway, their mother, Zainab, watched them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She carried a tray with 2 bowls of simple lentil soup and flatbread. She knew the reality that her children were trying to brave. Aisha's condition was curable, but the specialized surgery required was only performed in an elite private hospital in the capital. The cost was staggering, 5 million rupees. To a family living on a surveyor's modest freelance income, it might as well have been 50 million. That night, after Aisha had fallen asleep, Zainab sat with Xavier on the small veranda. The night sky was clear, a blanket of cold stars stretching overhead. The doctor called today from the capital, Xavier, Zainab said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain strong for her son. He says the degeneration is accelerating. If we cannot schedule the surgery within the next 18 months, the nerve damage will become permanent. She will lose the use of her hands completely, and eventually, her mobility. Xavier felt a cold fist tighten around his heart. The weight of the world felt as heavy as the mountain he had surveyed that morning. He looked down at his rough, calloused hands that could measure the earth to the exact millimeter, but could not produce the millions needed to save his sister. We will find a way, Ami, Xavier said, his voice dropping an octave, imbued with an unshakable iron will. I am submitting my master design proposal for the Grand Northern Township project next week. It is a massive project funded by Murad Ali, the country's largest philanthropist and builder. The prize and commission for the winning architect surveyor is 7 million rupees. Zainab looked at her son, her face filled with maternal pride mixed with deep anxiety. I know your talent, Beta. But I hear stories in the town. Kamran Malik is also competing for this project. People say he has connections, that he knows how to manipulate the system. He moves so fast. Xavier took his mother's hand. Let him move fast, Ami. True patience isn't about waiting passively in a corner, it is about working day and night with the absolute conviction that the harvest will come when the time is right. Saber is the active resistance against despair. Trust me, God does not let the sweat of an honest man go to waste. The boardroom of Ali Holdings in the capital city was an imposing chamber of glass, chrome, and polished mahogany. At the head of the long table sat Murad Ali, a 70-year-old self-made billionaire whose sharp, piercing gray eyes had seen through 3 generations of opportunists, politicians, and geniuses. The competition for the Grand Northern Township project had been whittled down to 2 final contenders, Kamran Malik and Xavier Khan. Kamran went first. His presentation was a masterclass in modern corporate showmanship. The lights dimmed, and a spectacular holographic 3D model filled the room. Towering glass skyscrapers, massive concrete commercial zones, and a sprawling amusement park concept dominated the landscape. Sir, Kamran spoke with absolute charisma, gesturing gracefully to the glowing blue lights of the hologram. My design maximizes every square inch of the valley. By cutting down the old pine forest on the southern slope and diverting the local river into an artificial canal system, we can increase commercial real estate value by 400%. We can complete phase 1 in just 12 months. Speed, luxury, and immediate returns. The board members nodded in approval, whispering among themselves. Murad Ali remained silent, his face an unreadable mask. He turned his eyes toward the young man sitting quietly at the end of the table. Mr. Khan, Murad Ali said, his deep voice carrying an immense authority. Let us see what your patience has produced. Xavier stood up. He did not have a holographic display. He walked to the presentation board and unrolled a massive, hand-drawn and digitally cross-referenced architectural map. It was a masterpiece of technical surveying. Every contour line of the mountain, every underground water vein, and every layer of soil was distinctly color-coded and detailed. My design, Xavier began, his voice calm, clear, and resonant, is built on the concept of harmony and longevity. I have spent the last 3 months surveying the valley floor and the surrounding mountain ridges. Kamran's plan to cut down the southern pine forest will destabilize the entire mountain slope. Within 3 years, the root systems will rot, and the first major landslide during the monsoon will completely bury his commercial zone. A murmur went through the room. Kamran's smile faltered, his jaw tightening. Furthermore, Xavier continued, pointing to the river system, diverting the river will starve the agricultural communities downstream of water, destroying the local economy. My design preserves the forest as a natural ecological barrier. The residential and commercial zones are built on the stable northern plateau, utilizing local stone and sustainable materials that adapt to the sub-zero winter temperatures. It will take 3 years to complete phase 1, not 1 year, but this township will stand safe, secure, and thriving for over a century without a single structural failure. Murad Ali leaned forward, his hands clasped beneath his chin. 3 years is a long time in today's economy, Mr. Khan. Investors are impatient. True wealth, sir, Xavier replied, looking directly into the old billionaire's eyes, is not measured by how fast money is made, but by how long it lasts. A project of this magnitude requires the patience to do it right from the very foundation. If we rush the earth, the Earth will eventually reclaim its due. The board meeting ended with the announcement that the final decision would be delivered in 2 weeks, after a thorough review of both technical blueprints. As they walked out into the grand lobby of the corporate tower, Cameron caught up with Xavier, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and desperation. He grabbed Xavier by the arm, dragging him toward a quiet corner away from the security guards. "What do you think you're doing, Xavier?" Cameron hissed, his voice a deadly whisper. "You think you're a hero with your dirt samples and your century-long safety plans? Do you have any idea how much money I've already spent bribing the mid-level directors to get this far? I need this contract." Xavier calmly pulled his arm out of Cameron's grip. "If your design was solid, Cameron, you wouldn't need bribes. Don't get holy with me." Cameron snarled, stepping closer. "I know about your sister, Aisha. I know she needs 5 million for her surgery in the capital. I know you don't have a single rupee to your name. Look, let's make a deal. Withdraw your proposal tomorrow. Tell them you made a calculation error. If you do that, I will hand you a check for 5 million rupees tonight. Your sister gets her surgery next week. You save her life, and I get the contract. Everyone wins." Xavier froze. The words struck him like a physical blow to the chest. 5 million rupees. The exact amount needed to save Aisha from a lifetime of paralysis. It was right there, within his grasp. All he had to do was lie. All he had to do was surrender his integrity, throw away his months of hard work, and let Cameron build a death trap in the valley. For a single, agonizing second, the image of Aisha's trembling hands and his mother's tired face flashed before his eyes. Despair screamed at him to take the money. Shortcut. The fast route. But then, the quiet voice of his soul spoke louder. Asterisk Saber. Asterisk. If he used tainted money born of corruption and lies to heal his sister, what kind of life would he be buying for her? Could he ever look her in the eyes again? Could he ever pray to the Almighty with clean hands? Xavier looked at Cameron, his eyes turning to absolute flint. "My sister's health is in the hands of God, Cameron. And he does not require me to sell my soul to save her. I will not withdraw my design. Let the best, most honest work win." Cameron stepped back, his face contorted with malice. "You are a fool, Xavier. A proud, stubborn fool. Watch how your patience turns to ashes while your sister loses her ability to walk." The 2 weeks passed, but the phone call from Ali Holdings never came. Instead, a public press release was issued. Due to sudden political shifts and regulatory updates in the northern province, the Grand Northern Township project was temporarily put on hold by the government. The decision on the main architect-surveyor contract was delayed indefinitely. The news broke Xavier's heart, not for himself, but for Aisha. The clock was ticking. Winter arrived in full force, burying the northern valley under thick, heavy sheets of ice and snow. The freelance surveying work dried up completely. No one wanted to measure land that was buried under 4 feet of drifts. Money in the Khan household ran terrifyingly low. The expensive medications that kept Aisha's pain at bay began to deplete. Xavier took up every odd job he could find. He spent his days shoveling snow from the driveways of the wealthy, unloading heavy sacks of coal from transport trucks in the freezing dawn, and tutoring local school children at night for pennies. His hands, once known for their precision with expensive engineering tools, became cracked, bleeding, and raw from manual labor in the sub-zero cold. One evening, Xavier returned home past midnight, his body shivering violently. As he walked into the kitchen to warm his hands over the dying embers of the stove, he heard a muffled sob from his mother's room. He walked to the doorway and looked inside. Zainab was kneeling on her prayer mat, her hands raised toward heaven, her face drenched in tears. "Oh Almighty," she wept quietly, her voice trembling with the agony of a mother watching her family break. "Give my son strength. He is carrying a mountain on his young shoulders and never utters a single word of complaint. Grant him the fruit of his patience. Do not let his faith shatter in the cold." Xavier closed his eyes, a single tear freezing on his cheek. He did not enter the room. He turned around, went back to the kitchen, and sat on the cold floor. He pulled his old surveying notebook from his pocket and looked at his drawings of the valley. Even in the darkest night, when the winter of life felt absolute, he chose to believe that spring was preparing its arrival beneath the snow. He opened his mouth and whispered a silent prayer, "Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin." Indeed, God is with the patient. Meanwhile, in the capital city, Cameron Malik did not wait for the winter to pass, nor did he wait for government approvals. Frustrated by the delay of the Grand Northern Township project, Cameron used his political connections to secure a different, massive private contract, The Elite Luxury Heights, a mega-complex of luxury apartments built on the steep hillsides overlooking the capital city. Cameron wanted to prove a point. He wanted to show the world, and Murad Ali, that speed was everything. He hired hundreds of laborers, forced them to work through the freezing winter in double shifts, and bypassed standard soil stabilization protocols by using quick-drying chemical compounds in the concrete foundations. "Move faster," Cameron would shout at his site engineers, standing under an umbrella while the winter sleet poured down. "The marketing team has already sold 80% of the penthouse suites. I want the structural frame completed before the spring thaws." An old, veteran engineer stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "Sir, the hillside has a high water table. The winter frost is expanding inside the rock fissures. If we pour concrete now without installing deep drainage piles, the foundation will crack when the ice melts in the spring." Cameron tore the clipboard from the engineer's hand. "Are you a surveyor or an old woman? The chemical additives will hold the concrete. If you don't want to build it at my speed, find another job. There are thousands of hungry men waiting outside that gate." The engineer fell silent. The construction continued at a breakneck, terrifying pace. Money poured into Cameron's bank accounts as wealthy investors bought into the dream of luxury living. Cameron bought a new mansion, a fleet of luxury cars, and flaunted his wealth across social media, mocking the traditional, slow-moving firms. 16 months had passed since the competition began. The deadline for Aisha's surgery was now less than 8 weeks away. Her condition had deteriorated significantly. She could no longer hold a spoon, let alone her digital stylus. She spent her days staring out the window at the melting snow, her beautiful spirit slowly fading into a quiet, resigned silence. And then, the heavens opened. The spring of 2026 did not arrive with gentle showers, it arrived with an unprecedented, historic monsoon system that swept across the country. For 7 consecutive days, torrential rains pounded the capital city and the northern mountains. The earth, saturated with months of melted snow, could no longer hold the water. On the 8th night of the storm, Xavier was awakened by a violent knocking on his front door. He opened it to find a high-ranking military officer and 2 local rescue workers standing in the pouring rain, their faces grim. "Xavier Khan," the officer shouted over the roar of the thunder. "Yes, I am. We need you immediately. The Elite Luxury Heights complex in the capital hillside is on the verge of a catastrophic structural collapse. A massive landslide has initiated on the upper slopes. The builder, Cameron Malik, is missing, and the site engineers have fled the scene. The civil defense teams found your survey maps of the ridge lines in the National Archive Registry. You are the only surveyor who has mapped the deep underground water channels of that fault line. There are over 200 families trapped in the lower residential blocks of that hill. You must come with us." Xavier didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. He did not say, "I told you so." He did not think about Cameron's arrogance or past insults. Lives were at stake. He ran back inside, grabbed his rugged jacket, kissed his mother's forehead, and looked at Aisha. "Be brave, my sister. I will be back." The scene at the Elite Luxury Heights was nothing short of an apocalyptic nightmare. The glittering, multi-million-dollar concrete towers stood precariously on the hillside, tilted at a terrifying 5-degree angle. The massive retaining walls that Cameron had rushed to build had cracked completely open, pouring out oceans of liquid mud and shattered concrete. The main access road had been completely wiped out by a mudslide, trapping the rescue vehicles at the bottom of the hill. Sirens wailed through the midnight darkness, searchlights cutting through the driving rain. Hundreds of panicked residents stood trapped on the high balconies, screaming for help as the ground shifted beneath them. In the emergency command tent, top government officials, structural engineers, and military commanders stood around a table, arguing desperately over what to do. "If we send the heavy rescue cranes up the southern path, the vibration will trigger a total collapse of Tower A," a senior colonel shouted. "We don't have time," an engineer cried out. "The foundation is sliding by 2 inches every hour." Xavier burst into the tent, drenched from head to toe, carrying a large, waterproof tube. He threw his technical survey maps onto the table, unrolling them flat. The authorities fell silent, looking at the young man. "Listen to me," Xavier said, his voice instantly commanding the room through its absolute authority and clarity. "The southern path is a death trap. Cameron Malik built his primary drainage channels directly over an active subterranean limestone vein." He pointed to a red-coated line on his map. "The rainwater has filled this cavern. It is liquefying the soil from underneath the foundation, not just from the surface." The chief structural engineer gasped, looking at the map. "He's right. My God, look at the water pressure calculations. If we drill there, the whole hill liquefies. Then how do we evacuate the residents? The colonel asked desperately. Xavier pointed to a rocky, untouched ridge line on the eastern side of the complex, completely separate from the main structures. Here, the eastern ridge. It is composed of solid granite with a root system anchored by old pine trees. I surveyed this area 2 years ago. It is completely stable. We can anchor the heavy rescue zip lines and aerial ladders to the granite bedrock of this ridge. It can support the weight of the rescue vehicles without moving a millimeter. The chief engineer quickly verified Xavier's mathematical data on his tablet. Within 30 seconds, he looked up, his eyes wide with awe. The data is flawless. The calculations are precise to the third decimal point. Sir, this plan will work. Move, 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 the colonel ordered. For the next 6 hours, Xavier stood on the front lines of the disaster, in the freezing mud and blinding rain. He used his surveying tools to monitor the micro-movements of the mountain, guiding the rescue teams via radio, telling them exactly when to advance and when to hold back as the structures shifted. Because of his precise directions, the aerial rescue ladders were safely anchored into the solid granite ridge. One by one, family by family, children, mothers, and elderly residents were pulled from the tilting buildings onto safety. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the gray storm clouds, all 214 families had been evacuated safely. Not a single life was lost. Just as the final child was pulled to safety, a terrifying sound like a cracking thunderbolt echoed through the valley. The foundation of the elite luxury heights gave way completely. The massive concrete towers broke into pieces, sliding down the hill in a roar of twisted steel and mud, destroying themselves completely in a matter of seconds. Cameron's empire of speed and shortcuts had vanished into the dirt. 2 days after the disaster, Xavier sat in the small, quiet waiting room of the provincial government headquarters. He was exhausted, his clothes still smelling of rain and mud, his hands covered in bandages from assisting the rescue workers. The door opened, and a secretary escorted him into a grand, private office. Sitting behind the desk was not a government minister, but Murad Ali. The old billionaire looked tired from the events of the week, but when he saw Xavier enter, he stood up from his chair, a gesture of respect he rarely afforded to anyone. "Sit down, Mr. Khan," Murad Ali said softly. Xavier took a seat, placing his worn notebook on his lap. "You saved over 200 lives 2 nights ago, Xavier," Murad Ali began, using his first name for the first time. "The official inquiry report came out this morning. Cameron Malik has been arrested at the border trying to flee the country. His assets have been frozen, and he faces decades in prison for criminal negligence and corruption." Xavier remained silent, feeling no joy in his rival's downfall, only a deep sadness for what greed had caused. The inquiry also noted, Murad Ali continued, leaning forward, that if the City Planning Commission had listened to your original survey maps of that hillside 2 years ago, this catastrophe would never have been permitted. Your data was absolute. Your patience in analyzing the earth was the only thing that stood between life and death for those families. Murad Ali pulled a thick, official document from his drawer and slid it across the mahogany table toward Xavier. On the cover, embossed in gold letters, were the words, "The Grand Northern Township Project, Chief Architect and Site Director." "The government has lifted the delay," Murad Ali smiled, his eyes warming with a profound admiration. "The project is fully funded, and I have personally fired the entire middle management board that was playing politics with the contracts. The project is yours, Xavier. You have total creative and structural control. Your timeline of 3 years is approved. Build it your way. Build it to last a century." Xavier looked at the document. The dream he had worked for, the days of freezing in the mountains, the nights of hunger, it was all there, realized. "And there is one more thing," Murad Ali added, pulling out a second envelope, a small, blue one with the emblem of the country's most elite neurological institute. "Your commission advance has been processed this morning. 5 million rupees have already been transferred directly to the capital hospital. A medical helicopter is arriving in your valley town at noon today to transport your sister, Aisha, for her surgery. The top surgeons in the continent are waiting for her." Xavier froze. The room seemed to fade away. The heavy, crushing mountain of worry that he had carried on his chest for 16 months suddenly dissolved into nothingness. He looked down at the documents, then at his rough, bandaged hands. He tried to speak, to thank the man sitting before him, but no words could form in his throat. The emotion was too vast, too overwhelming. He bowed his head, placed his face in his calloused hands, and wept silently. They were not tears of sadness, but the tears of a man who had stood in the eye of the storm, held on to his truth, and finally witnessed the clouds break into glorious sunshine. The northern valley of Darien had been transformed, but not destroyed. Nestled beautifully against the majestic mountain cliffs stood the grand northern township. Beautiful, stone residential villas blended seamlessly into the natural topography. The ancient pine forest stood tall and lush on the southern slope, its roots anchoring the mountain, its green canopy breathing life into the clean air. Children played in the parks, and local businesses thrived by a crystal-clear river that flowed naturally through the valley floor. It was a city built on honor, built on safety, built on patience. On the high plateau overlooking the main square, a beautiful, modern community art gallery had its grand opening. The gallery was filled with hundreds of people from across the country, admiring the vibrant, breathtaking digital paintings on display. At the center of the gallery stood a massive, large-format masterpiece. It was a digital painting of a mountain sunset, the colors vibrant, bold, and perfectly balanced, containing a light that seemed to warm the entire room. Standing in front of the painting was Aisha Khan. Her hands were perfectly steady, holding a glass of juice as she laughed and talked with a group of young art students. Her recovery had been absolute. Her fingers, once paralyzed, were now creating magic once again. Xavier stood a few paces back, dressed in a sharp, professional blazer, though his boots were still covered in a little bit of valley dust from his morning inspection. He watched his sister smile, his heart overflowing with a quiet, boundless joy. His mother, Zainab, walked up beside him, her hair completely white now, but her face radiating an angel-like peace. She slipped her arm through her son's, looking up at the beautiful painting, and then at the magnificent, safe city visible through the grand glass windows of the gallery. "Look at what you built, Beta," Zainab whispered, her voice filled with tears of happiness. Xavier turned to his mother, a soft, beautiful smile breaking across his face. He kissed her hand gently, holding it tight. "I didn't build it alone, Ami," Xavier said softly, looking out at the sunset painting that his sister had created with her perfectly healed hands. "We planted the seed in the middle of a bitter winter. We watered it with our tears, and we protected it with our prayers." He paused, breathing in the sweet mountain air of the valley. "The world was right, Ami. The wait was long, and the storm was fierce, but the fruit of patience is indeed the sweetest thing this earth can ever give."